Hello, everyone. Welcome to a presentation called The First Look at Communication. Scratch, start over. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the presentation, First Look at Interpersonal Communication. I'm going to share a screen with you so that you can see the PowerPoint slides, and then we'll get going. So this presentation combines my own personal collection of ideas about interpersonal communication from having studied it and taught it now for over 30 years. And also it's organized partly by the order of the concepts in Julia Wood's chapter in her book, Interpersonal Communication, Everyday Encounters. And I have provided for you the first chapter from the version 7 or edition 7 of her book if you are interested in reading the chapter. However, if you don't read the whole chapter, you still will be able to do the quizzes and the activities just on this presentation alone if you pay close attention. So I highly recommend that you take notes, and that will make your time with me very efficient here. Let's look at what we're going to talk about. So this is a list of all the things that I'll be talking about, okay? And hopefully this is what will happen by the end, is that you will understand the reasons for interpersonal communication, which I will sometimes call IP for short. Then you will identify human accomplishments that result from interpersonal communication. You will identify the human needs filled by interpersonal communication, the components and goals of interpersonal communication, and you will compare and contrast I, it, I, thou, and I, you communication, which are some ideas from a philosopher named Martin Buber. And you will identify features of interpersonal communication. You will also look at the key features of transactional communication, which is one of the communication models we're going to be looking at, and identify the principles. And finally, the skills for competent interpersonal communication. Boy, on a hot day like this, that's quite a load, but really it'll go fairly quickly. I have interspersed this presentation with activities, either discussion items or tell you to write something down or to go and do a quiz, so that you'll break up listening to me with being actively engaged, and that will help you absorb the information and actually apply the information and get more out of this presentation. Why do humans communicate? So we're like other primates, and we are wired to be social. So whether we're looking at these monkeys in Japan or human beings doing the same thing, a hot tub in the snow, can you imagine? That would actually feel pretty good right now in this heat. And like other primates, we get many needs met through our social interaction, you know, grooming, taking care of each other, and so on. And we work together, did all sorts of things, farming, hunting, computer programming, classes. That's just what we do. That's our nature. So I want you right now to stop for a minute, stop this video, and then on a piece of paper, I want you to list the reasons that you, yourself, why do you communicate? And then save this list, set it aside, and you will use it later for one of the Canvas discussion questions, okay? So go ahead and pause and then come back when you finish making your list. Communication facilitates joint action. So what do I mean by that? Well, it facilitates or helps people do things together. A relay race is a perfect example. You get the baton from someone else and then you run and so on. And you're dependent on the others for getting that baton and for also catching it properly, knowing the right way to do it. And when people work together well, then you have a good outcome. So that's joint action. Lots of other things. There's people that work at cooking together. We've seen these cooking competitions on TV where families work as a team, or other dance competitions, schoolwork sometimes. Lots and lots of activities at work, yeah? We do things together and the communication helps that work better. Now, what I want you to do, after listening to me for a little while, is turn your attention to another phenomenal speaker. His name is Steven Johnson. He did a TED Talk, And I want you to watch the TED Talk. I want you to take notes because there's a quiz at the end. And that way you get to test your understanding and your retention of the material in there. So I have the URL listed in here, but also if you go to the modules page, you can click on it and you can find it quite easily. It's his talk, okay? So go ahead and watch the talk, and then when you're done, do the quiz while all that information is fresh in your head, and then we'll move on to the next part of this presentation. Interpersonal communication imperative. What do we mean by imperative? Well, it's something that we feel that we must do. So there were two theorists, William Schutz and Abraham Maslow, who came up with ideas about what were the social needs that made people communicate or what they got out of communicating. So we'll start with William Schutz. So he postulated three basic needs: inclusion, so that's to be a part of a group and to be included with their activities and their conversations. Then there's affection. We liked for people to let us know that they like us, and we also want to express that we like them, appreciate them, and so on. So that's affection. And then the last thing is control. So we like to have control over the things that happen to us, our activities. Some of us like to control what groups do, so we like to control other people's actions. Some people don't mind being controlled by someone, especially if they know what they're doing. So these are the three things that William Schutz discussed, and he actually developed a kind of inventory to see where you stood on these, and had some interesting findings about what sorts of people get along, depending on what these needs are that they have. And then we have Abraham Maslow, who built on this and included, expanded, you could say he expanded on these things, okay? So if you start at the bottom with the physical needs, all people need to have their basic needs met to survive. And then after they can do that, you know, water, air, food, and so on, then you can start working on the safety and protection needs. And so people build communities to help each other out and to protect each other, and the kinds of weapons that hunters and gatherers developed, and then the kinds of shelters that people built for safety and protection, yeah. And also just kind of ways that people interacted could help to provide protection. Then we have belonging needs. So we are social creatures, as I said, and we want to belong to families, we want to belong to groups, we want to belong to teams, we want to belong to spiritual organizations. So we have all kinds of ways that we express our needs for belonging, being with our friends, all of these things. And then we have the esteem needs, which are to be respected, and typically to be respected for our character as well as for the kinds of competencies that we have. And then finally, self-actualization needs. So we like to be all we can be. We like to accomplish goals. We like to get better at things. We like to see ourselves progress in life. And one of the reasons we go to school is to progress and get to a higher level of understanding and competency and in our chosen fields and so on, yeah? So these were the needs. And so it is through our interaction with other people and communicating about that that we get these needs met. Having discussed these interpersonal imperatives, I want you now to go to the discussions, and I want you to think about, again, the reason why you communicate, and I want you to enter that into the discussion. And then there's another discussion called the interpersonal imperative discussion. So there's two discussions, and you can find these on the module page, and they're to do with these reasons and these needs that we get fulfilled, and also to relate it back to Stephen Johnson's talk and what he said people are able to accomplish through communication, yeah? How it connects to creativity and innovation. So go ahead and do that now, and then when you're finished, come on back. Now we're up to the components of interpersonal communication. So interpersonal communication is not just talk, although that's a big part of it. Our verbal is the talk, the things that we say. On top of verbal interaction, we also have nonverbal. So it could be something like a handshake, a nod, a gesture. Okay, if I turn my back on somebody, All of these things also communicate information about uh, the state of being, about our relationship, about specific information we might need. All of these things can be communicated. Okay, that's nonverbal. Then we have written discourse. So we have typing on computers, we have writing on post-it notes, we have texting now we can write, although that overlaps with electronic communication. So if it's written down, then that's what we call written discourse. And then finally electronic, which has become multifaceted. So it could be text, as I said. You could send someone a video, like I'm video taping this lecture so that you can see it at home. Other kinds of things, picking up the phone and just talking, or having a video conference. So we have lots of different modes of communicating interpersonally now using electronics. The goals of interpersonal communication are connected to the needs that we saw from our theorists. And these goals could be supporting someone. So if a friend's telling you about an adventure, or if a friend is telling you about a breakup or their situation with their parents or their jobs or whatever, we're typically trying to support them as they tell us these things, right? Another function of interpersonal communication is to coordinate, which is typically coordinating activities, work, and so on. And it could be nowadays, you know, there's a lot of coordination going on to coordinate first aid. I heard a lot of talk this last week about how they're going to coordinate getting vaccines out when the vaccines are developed for COVID. So that's a huge, huge, huge coordination job that people have to do, and they're going to do it by communicating with each other. Informing, so giving people information. So right now I'm informing you about the field of interpersonal communication and what we study. And you could be informing someone at work about things that are going on or how to do things. And then finally, persuading is when you're trying to convince people. So you have your run-of-the-mill sales pitch where people try to sell you something. You have people telling you who to vote for. You have people persuading to adopt the policy or not adopt the policy, and so on. So these are the major goals that we have when we communicate with each other. It's important to participate effectively in our diverse society that you have strong communication competencies, okay? The likelihood of your being able to meet your needs depends on that ability to participate in this society that has diverse people. And to be effective, then you need to be able to understand people who are different than you. I have to understand people who are different from me. And that is what is really required. We have more diversity these days than at past times in history because of transportation, because of all of this technology that has brought so many different cultures together. Very, very diverse. And we're not the only country that's diverse. Canada is very diverse. Many countries in Europe are diverse. And so lots and lots of people are trying to learn how to communicate with people who are different. And those are very, very important interpersonal communication skills. Now, there was a philosopher named Martin Buber who came up with these ideas about the different types of communication. So they exist on a continuum. So at the least personal or the most impersonal, you have what's known as I-it communication, where the person that you talk to is just an object for you to accomplish your goal, and you're not thinking about them as a human being. So when you give an order to somebody to go do something for you, you're typically not thinking about them as full human beings. And sometimes we do that with people we see on the street that we don't know. Sometimes we do that with people who are waiting on us at stores or restaurants and so on. Then you have the next level, which is a higher level of connection, where you recognize the humanity in that person, and you may talk about some things. Like I might talk about the weather with somebody because the weather's been really intense here with all this heat. And you might talk about some activities that you did and so on. So it's more general topics that bring people together, and they can be specific. So when you talk to people in class, but you never see them once you graduate, you never see these people again, right? You're having I-you communication, you're treating them like human beings, but you're not getting real deep. Then you have the I-thou. I-thou is when you really get to know these people, you get to understand their character, what makes them tick, you understand their values, you know what's important to them, and it's a mutual kind of relationship, and they also understand you. So that is the I-thou. So Martin Buber used to talk about that and how if we would treat more people as if we were having an I thou, although realistically we don't have time to have I thou relationships with everybody because it takes a lot of time to get to know somebody. It's not something you can just do like that, yeah? So that is Martin Buber's theory about communication at different levels and the way we treat people. And I would say that part of the problem that we're having in our society today, unfortunately, is that too many people are treating others like it's, whether we're talking about the kind of abuse by the police towards Black people and other people of color, or if we're talking about the way people from different political parties are both speaking to each other and demeaning each other like they don't even matter as human beings. We're having a lot of this I-it communication, and we would make this world a better place if we would elevate the communication to the I-you, no matter how much we disagree with people. And that's one of our challenges. And maybe in this class, you'll see how that might be possible. Now, the features of interpersonal communication, there's a number of different features. The first is that it's selective. And so, as I said, we don't have time to get really deep with everybody and get to know everyone. We live in a massive society these days. So we're selective. With interpersonal communication, we're selective, and we talk to certain people that we are interested in getting to know. We talk to our coworkers, we talk to our family, we talk to our friends, and maybe we join some groups and we'll get to know some of those people. What we don't really use a lot of in-depth or I-you and I-thou communication with people outside of these smaller groups that we know. Another feature of communication is that it's systemic. So it exists in a context and with lots of other things going on. So it's complex. There's many things that get that become significant in how you interpret what people are telling you. And there's this idea of something that's called noise, which interferes with messages going across. So if you think of a message as, it's kind of like an arrow that you shoot and you're trying to get it to the target. Noise would be something that interferes with that message getting through to your target. So there's different types of noise. So one type of noise is physiological noise. Like when I go to Starbucks and try to have a conversation with somebody, the blender is going and I have a hard time hearing what people are saying. Many of you probably have that experience. I'm sorry, that's physical noise. Physical noise is when you hear actual noise that is interfering. Physiological noise is noise that is coming from your body, your physiology. So if I have a headache and I can't pay attention, or if I have a stomach ache, or if I'm like so hot that I can't really listen to what people are telling me, that would be physiological noise. Psychological noise is when you're having some intense emotions and it's preventing you from being able to focus on the conversation that's in front of you. So if I know that I have a really hard test coming up, I may be having a hard time paying attention to the presentation that the teacher's telling me right now that could actually help me get the test because I'm too busy worrying about it. Or if I broke up with my girlfriend and my boyfriend last week and then I'm so upset about that I can't even hear what people are talking about, or I'm worried because my sister got sick and I'm really hoping she doesn't have COVID. So that would be psychological noise. There's different emotions that are happening that are interfering with my ability to listen to what people are telling me. And then there's something called semantic noise, which is when the meaning of a word is unclear to you, you don't understand it. And so then you lose your attention and your focus because you're trying to figure out, well, what are they talking about? And this sometimes happens when you take classes that have a lot of technical terminology. And then, if you lose focus for a little while and then you don't hear what's said and then you don't know the meaning of some of the terms, then you get lost. And when people go to other countries and they don't know the language very well, they can get lost, okay? But another way that semantic noise can happen is that different cultures have different meanings for things. So for example, I had a student who was a hunter, and this is when I taught at San Francisco State, where most of the students, I think, would say were very liberal pacifists who didn't believe in guns. And when he gave a speech about the stopping power of guns, the class turned against him and started attacking him at the end of his speech and we're calling him a murderer. And I had to stop, stop and try to get people to talk about what he could have said in his speech to help people understand what he was saying, that he wasn't saying go out and shoot people, that he was just trying to explain that here's what guns can do. So when you hear something that has a meaning that bothers you or creates some psychological problem, defensiveness, then that's like semantic noise because you understood it differently. All right, now moving from systemic to processual. So communication is something that's ongoing and it's a process. It's not like, boom, it happens once, like shooting an arrow and it hits its target and that's done, yeah? It's ongoing in interpersonal communication. So we establish relationships and we have lots and lots of different kinds of communication exchanges as we build the relationship. And then the relationship changes over time. There's stages of relationship development and also when they fall apart, we call it relationship dissolution. So it's a process. Another of the features is that we share personal knowledge and we learn a lot of personal things about people when we engage in interpersonal communication. So we need to respect that. And then another feature is that through the process of communicating interpersonally, we create meanings. And there's two major types of meanings. So one is the content, and the content is the topic that we're talking about. So right now, I'm telling you about interpersonal communication. That's our content, right? But what's the relationship, okay? Do I care about my students? Do I want them to understand? Do I invite them to come and talk to me if they're having an issue? Contact me, talk on the phone, talk on the internet, talk on Zoom or whatever. See, so there's relational aspects to what we're talking about. So what you think people's intentions are towards you when they communicate is an important part of the message. It's not only what they're saying, it's how they're saying and how you think they feel about you as they're communicating it. So that would be the relationship level. So things that people look at for the relationship level are the responsiveness, how much affection and how much power. Am I sitting there looking down at my students and saying that they're ignorant, or am I looking at my students like they're equal human beings who are capable of learning and we just need to share ideas? Okay, so all of these things get communicated in the way that people communicate interpersonally. Now, there's three major models of communication that are talked about in the field, and they are the linear, the interactive, and the transactional. And I'm going to go over these quickly because I have a nice presentation for you to watch that's short, less than 5 minutes, by a colleague of mine to explain the transactional in more depth. So the linear model is the first model that was developed, and it was based on telegraph messages. And so you have a message, it starts with the source and it gets sent to a receiver, and the receiver picks up the message, okay? Along the way, if there's something in the way that blocks it, that's called noise, okay? So that was your basic linear model. It just had a sender and receiver and some noise in it. So very simplistic and misses a lot of the important facets of communication. Next, you had an interactive model. And in the interactive model, you had, in addition to the sender and the receiver and the potential noise, you had the idea that it's a process, and that in that process, there was also feedback. So you would have a person who created the message, which would be encoder, would create that message and then send it, and then the receiver would get that message and decode it, interpret it, and then give feedback, so that it was more of a process than just like a shooting an arrow out there. Okay, so that was an improvement, but then it got even better. So now we have this presentation on the transactional model by Alex Lyon, who was one of my classmates at the University of Colorado, a great guy and a wonderful professor, and he's now department chair, so he's been very highly appreciated. And he created a YouTube channel where he has lots of short videos, and so this is one of them on the transactional model. So I'd like you to stop now, stop listening to me, take a break from my voice, listen to a fresh voice, and hear what he has to say about transactional communication, or the transactional model of communication. And you can also see it on modules and click on it. Okay, so I'll see you when you get back. I hope you appreciated Alex's presentation on the transactional model. I thought it was very well done. And so here's the major components of that model for you to have and to help you remember them better. Okay, so some important additions to the transactional model is that it adds the field of experience. So it's not just these isolated senders and receivers, right? There's a field of experience that influences how meaning gets constructed and interpreted. So that field of experience could include the societal culture, the background of the individuals, their age, their education, their mood, their financial security, and so on. All these different facets of human beings are a part of what happens, or it gets considered when we create and when we receive messages and interpret them, okay? So you have the communicators who do the encoding and the decoding, and then they will create strategies to try to minimize the barriers, so they don't want noise to get in the way, but it does also recognize that there is noise, which I talked about earlier, the different types of noise that can happen. Okay, so those are the important aspects of the transactional model. These are the key features. Okay, it's dynamic, it's ongoing. It's not just one shot sending a message and boom, it's over, right? It's ongoing. It could be over months, could be over years, could be over a lifetime. And so it's dynamic. It keeps you know, having a different interactions. Okay, you are simultaneously a sender and receiver, a coder and a decoder, because if I'm sitting here listening, when I'm sitting here listening to you, if you're in the same room as me, I'm actually looking at your face, I'm looking at your eyes, I'm looking at your facial expressions, your posture, and I'm looking at to see, are you understanding, are you appreciating, do you have questions? So we are kind of do that. It's harder to do that with electronic communications. We can't see as much, but typically that is going on. And I will get feedback from you, but it's going to be asynchronous. It's not right now while I'm talking, but I'm going to get it back later in the form of you asking me questions, or if you saying, hey, I really like that presentation, or hey, you know, I just couldn't follow it, whatever. That feedback, it's ongoing, right? So then the fact that there's context is really, really important. So the context will change how you frame things and also how you interpret them, okay? And then the field of experience, what experiences do I have? What experiences do you have that come into the picture, okay? And then, okay, there's always noise. And I think all of the models recognize that, all right? So those are the three models with the focus. The most important one for you to remember is a transactional model. After reviewing now these three models, I have another discussion for you, a discussion question. So after reviewing these models and viewing Alex Lyon's presentation, I want you to go to the discussion post and apply what you've learned and write about that, okay? So there's more specific instructions on the discussion page, and you can find it in the modules page. So go ahead and find it, and come on back when you're done. The next area we're going to talk about are these principles of interpersonal communication. So these were ideas that were established about communication and written about in a journal, and then people actually argued back and forth around these for a while. But today, most people accept these to just be basic principles that are true about communication. So the first one is that we cannot not communicate. Now, this applies to once you've engaged in communication. So if I've never met any people in Mongolia, then they don't know I'm communicating with them. But once I've established communication, then it's hard for me to not communicate. And you've probably noticed this when you have a friend that you've been texting and they don't text you back. You're like, hey, what's up with that? Are they mad? Do they not like me? Did they have an accent? You're like, they're communicating something by not communicating with you. And same thing is if I turn my back on you, right? You're like, whoa, she just turned my back. She turned her back on me. Like, what's that about, right? Or so everything that you do communicates once you've established a connection with somebody. Interpersonal communication is irreversible, and so that means you can't take it back. People are not going to forget what you said. So you need to be careful about what you say. People can forgive, but typically they don't forget. And the more of an emotional impact something has, the greater the chances are that person is going to remember that. And so it's a really important thing to remember especially when you're having conflict, and we can get triggered emotionally and lose control and then not care about what we say. And then some of those things that we say when we're angry can be really, really hard to take back. So be careful about what you say to people. Then we have the principle that interpersonal communication involves ethical choices. And so whenever we communicate, we are making choices. And there are people that will say, hey, I couldn't help it because he did X, Y, and Z. Well, you have to make a choice about what you're going to do. And it's important to retain your ethics so that you can maintain a good reputation, and that builds your character. And that's how people are going to see you. So it's very important. People construct meanings in interpersonal communication. So when we talk, we're actually exchanging ideas and meanings about what these things, what does this all add up to? And it's something that a lot of times people don't realize, that we're actually creating the meaning of our relationship as we engage in this talk. Yeah. So that's an important principle. Then meta communication affects meaning. So meta communication is communication about the communication. So if I say, wow, that was a very intense statement. You want to tell me why you're so intense right now? Like, I'm communicating about how the communication happens. Okay, so communication about communication is affects meaning, and it also has to do with like the emotional aspects of what's being communicated and the relational. Like, what are you saying about the relationship when you communicate? Okay, interpersonal communication develops and sustains relationships. So that might seem obvious to you, but what this means is that if you want to have a relationship, you have to engage in communication. It's easy in these days to just kind of not connect with people and just let a relationship go and take it for granted that it'll be there when you come back to it. But not communicating communicates like you're not as invested in the relationship. And so if you want relationship to develop, you have to have ongoing communication and some agreement about what that's supposed to be like. Okay. Interpersonal communication is not a panacea. So you may have heard the expression, what we need here is some more communication. So more communication doesn't necessarily change a situation. So it's not always going to solve things. You have a chance of resolving issues if you have communication, but just because you communicate, that doesn't mean you're going to be successful in resolving an issue or persuading people to do what you want to do. And it's unfortunate, but it doesn't take care of everything, but it helps us to get closer to finding ways to get along and find solutions and better ways to do things and so on. But just don't be disappointed when you form the perfect way to talk about something and you don't get what you want, because we don't always get what we want. Interpersonal communication effectiveness can be learned. So last week I had you doing an exercise of finding some good icebreakers for starting a conversation, right? And some people said, hey, I really appreciated that. I felt more comfortable talking to strangers. So that's an example of how you can develop effectiveness. So all kinds of situations that you're going to have to deal with, you can learn how to do it better. You can get better at interviewing for jobs. You can get better at doing presentations. You can get better at dating. You can get better at finding things to say so that people will appreciate you. Whatever there is to learn in interpersonal communication, you can learn it if the will's there, and you will do the research to figure out how to do it. There's so much information out there today. It's incredible. Now, an important thing to mention is that interpersonal communication happens a lot now with social media, and this didn't used to be the case. But now it's extremely important, and we're using it more than ever, especially now that we're in this like semi-quarantine situation. So we get a lot of our needs that we would normally get through face-to-face communication. We're getting them met now by talking on Zoom, talking on FaceTime, texting each other, using WhatsApp, all these different ways to communicate now, sending texts, using Facebook or these other Twitter, lots of different things that people use to connect with people, okay? And then social networking sites are becoming a major source for satisfying our needs to belong and for our self-esteem, because we typically put out positive things about ourselves onto these sites. And then it's evolving. It's changed so much since it first started, and it's probably going to just continue to evolve throughout time. And that's kind of what human beings do, is just keep on creating and changing, creating and changing. Okay. Now, the guide to how to improve your interpersonal communication confidence, okay? So, or this is a guide to having confidence. So to have confidence, this is what is going to help you, okay? So that you can be effective, appropriate, and ethical. First of all, recognize that there's a range of skills that are involved in effective interpersonal communication. And you may be good at one set of skills, but there's other skills that you can also learn to keep on elevating your interpersonal communication competency. It's important that people adapt to the specific situation and people that they're dealing with appropriately. So what might work when you're hanging out with a group of friends might not work when you're at work, or what you do at work might not work well when you're dating, and so on. So you have to think about the context and the person and the situation to adapt appropriately. Engage in dual perspective. That means that you want to take the other person's perspective, but you want to maintain your own. You want to empathize with what they're feeling, but you also want to respect your own feelings as well. So it's not giving up what you think or believe or how you feel, but trying to engage in both, understanding, empathizing, and also sharing your own experiences, thoughts, and ideas and feelings. So that's a dual perspective. Monitor your communication. So check out how your communication is going to potentially affect people, or how it is affecting people. So I might have heard a great story that I totally loved, but I realized that it's not really appropriate to repeat the story in the classroom. It's not the right kind of story for class, right? So I stopped myself from telling the story, even though like it occurs to me in the moment. I have to stop myself, like, whoa, that's not the good place to do that. Or if I'm talking to a group of students and I see puzzled looks on their face, I'm like, whoa, they're not understanding, so I better check in. So I can ask, well, so what's happening? What's your understanding about this? And then I can try to adjust and change what I'm doing so that I can be effective with the people that I'm speaking with. The last thing, commit to ethical communication. And this is so important because you are creating your reputation, your brand. Everyone talks about branding, right? You want to have a stellar brand. You don't want it to be marred with unethical things. So remember that and communicate ethically, be true to your word, and be honest. Sometimes it's hard to be honest because you might feel like we're going to hurt somebody by being honest. So we try to say it as gently as possible, but that's the most important thing. It's not good to withhold information and lie to people to protect yourself or protect them, because in the long run, it's going to come out. So be ethical, and remember that's part of your character. That's part of your brand that you're building over your lifetime, and you don't want to mar it at any point, because fixing your reputation is hard work, and sometimes you can't do it. All righty, we're at the end now. This is the last slide. So competent interpersonal communicators interact in ways that are effective, appropriate, and ethical. So that's the concluding thought about this presentation. I know we covered a lot of material, but we broke it down into some sections where you could be active. So I'm hoping that you got a lot out of this. And so on Wednesday, we will be doing some activities and having some discussions, and then you will finish up by writing a few more discussion posts and doing one more quiz online. Okay, I'll see you Wednesday. Take care.